embarrassing.
Katie, you ever pull a stunt like that again?
Don't be so selfish. This is my past we're trying to track down.
What's this we business? I mean, I'm the one that keeps on telling you that you've got no proof.
Oh, yeah? This is a letter from the woman I told you about, a friend of my mother's that gave her baby away. Listen to this bit. Pam, you have been wonderful. At least I know my baby is cared for. As long as there are people like you in the world, innocent children won't suffer. What does that sound like to you?
And you call that hard proof?
It sounds like my mother's the one that took that baby, Todd. That's what it sounds like.
Well, maybe, but what are you going to do about it?
This letter's got an address.
Katie, you can't.
I have to see her face to face.
You pull a stunt like that and you might end up with no family at all.
I have to know, Todd. I need to know who my mother is.
Neighbours, everybody needs good neighbours. Just a friendly wave each morning.
On Tuesday, every second counts, leading up to the search for an East End killer at 7:30.
You blew your top at Eddie the day he was killed. Is this what you're telling me? Do the police know about this?
And at 8, the fall and rise of Reginald Perrin.
Do you regard me as some kind of monster?
Of course not, CJ.
At 8:30, grandmother, mother, and 2.4 children.
Hello, love. Hello? Mann, stop it.
9:30, the women of making out return as parenthood brings the changes.
I've been giving it thought, though. I mean, we're talking respectability now, aren't we?
And on Film 91, Glenn Close plays an opera diva in Meeting Venus, David Putnam's latest venture, a European co-production directed by Istvan Sabo.
At 10:50, the film Hawks, a black comedy of two patients' final fling.
Your good health.
This is Tuesday on 1.
On Look North tonight, county councillors vote for no quick fix for the Derbyshire police funding crisis. And the man they call Murphy the Mouth signs for Huddersfield.
On BBC 2 now, Kirk Douglas and Trevor Howard star in the comedy thriller Catch Me a Spy. This is BBC 1.
The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Peter Sissons and Anna Ford.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. The time that the kidnappers holding the British hostage Jackie Mann promise that he'll be released. So far, though, there's no confirmation that Mr. Mann, a hostage for 865 days, has been freed. But his wife says this time it looks like it really will happen. UN inspectors in Iraq are detained again. President Bush warns Saddam Hussein not to repeat his mistakes. John Major will veto the latest plans for European political union unless they're changed. And Cardinal Basil Hulme joins the criticism of the government's education policies. The Lebanese kidnappers holding the British hostage Jackie Mann say they will release him about now. It's expected that Mr. Mann will be handed over at a hotel in West Beirut. This afternoon, the Revolutionary Justice Organization issued a statement saying that Mr. Mann, who was kidnapped more than 2 years ago, would be freed and asking a UN envoy to be present at the exchange.
The Syrian Foreign Ministry is ready, and if Mr. Mann is released on time, he should be here for a news conference in a few hours from now. This was the statement from his kidnappers, the Revolutionary Justice Organization, which confirmed that the release process was on again. It had a picture of the American Joseph Sicipio attached to it, but specifically said that Jackie Mann would be freed within 48 hours. Another communication from Beirut late this afternoon said Mr. Mann would be released at 6 o'clock British time. Mr. Mann's wife, Sunny, is still in Cyprus, where she returned from Beirut last weekend. She was weary after a week of intense speculation that her husband would be freed, which was then followed by a terse communication from the kidnappers that they'd decided to keep him. Mrs. Mann is likely to fly to Damascus in an RAF plane, which would then take her husband to Lynham or Akrotiri, depending on his condition. Hostages are normally taken by road from Beirut after being released into the hands of the Syrians, who still control the military there. The journey takes 3 hours. The UN envoy, Jan Domenico Pico, who was involved in the John McCarthy release, is also expected to be involved. If Mr. Mann, who's 77, is well enough, he's likely to appear at the Syrian Foreign Ministry. Then the plan is that he will be driven to the British residence, where the ambassador, Andrew Green, will give him some time to rest before he's flown out. Michael Macmillan, BBC News in Damascus.
Well, we're joined now live from the Syrian capital, Damascus, by Michael Macmillan. Michael, is this release now a formality?
It looks, Peter, as though it is a formality. Certainly, if the kidnappers have got to the stage of releasing a statement mentioning a specific time and a specific place, the Beau Rivage Hotel in Beirut, then I think we've got to the stage where they do intend to release Mr. Mann, and I would fully expect him to be released within the next half hour or hour.
What is the first that anyone will know?
Could you repeat that question,
What is the
please,
first that anyone will know about the release? How will it be made known?
Well, what usually happens is that the kidnappers and those involved in the handover of the Syrians and the United Nations in the form of their envoy, Jan Domenico Pico, will make contact with some of the news agencies in Beirut, and usually that's the way the first word emanates from the city that a hostage has been released.
Could anything go wrong at this stage?
I think it's highly unlikely. It looks as though the kidnappers have got over their disagreements last week, when they seemed to be unsure of how they wanted this process to continue. It's also important to mention that we're hearing noises out of Jerusalem this evening that the Israelis may now be prepared to release another 20 or so Shiite prisoners following information about another one of their soldiers, specifically a private Yossi Fink. Now, Yossi Fink is not thought to be alive, but the Israelis have always made it clear that if they receive information on their missing servicemen, alive or dead, then they're willing to deal. So I think the signs are that this process is continuing and it is picking up momentum.
So it's not just the kidnappers getting over their own internal differences, it's the Israelis giving the whole process another push.
It is, but the Israelis have made it quite clear that they're going to do this in stages, and they will not continue unless they receive specific information about their missing servicemen. I think we can deduce from what's happening now that they have received some more information and that some sort of deal has been done behind the scenes between them, the Hezbollah groups that hold the hostages, and the United Nations for this whole process to pick up momentum, as I said, and continue.
And what's the best betting about when all the hostages will be released?
I don't think anyone would want to bet on that, given the events of last week when we had so many statements and counter-statements, and at the end of it all, Mr. Mann wasn't released. I see this as a slow, tedious, stage-by-stage process that could take us up to Christmas and beyond.
Michael Macmillan, thank you. We'll come right back to you when you get any news.
Prime Minister has given a guarded welcome to the news from Beirut. He said he hoped the reports proved accurate.
I hope very much that it is true. It has been an agonizing time for Mr. Mann, an equally agonizing time, I suspect, for Mrs. Mann, and it would be my fondest wish, and I believe everybody else's as well, that he would be released very speedily and return to his family. I very much hope that will be the case, but we must await events. I hope we will not have to wait too long.
And as we wait, let's look now at today's other news. President Bush has again issued a strong warning that Iraq should cooperate with UN inspection teams. He said Iraq's behavior was unacceptable and that he did not want to see Saddam Hussein miscalculate again. Today, for the second day running, a UN team in Baghdad has been detained by Iraqi soldiers. The inspectors had discovered more information about Iraq's nuclear weapons program.
President Bush, who's meeting a series of foreign dignitaries in New York, is said to be increasingly pessimistic that Iraq will fully cooperate in the United Nations monitored destruction of its nuclear weapons program. And he condemned Iraq's detention yet again of UN inspectors.
They should not be retaining UN officials, and we're in urgent consultation about that right now. So this is unacceptable behavior, and I would not want to see Saddam Hussein miscalculate yet again.
White House sources suggest the U.S. might deliver a 48-hour ultimatum to Iraq to comply with all UN resolutions, but the brink has not yet been reached.
You don't make decisions of this magnitude that could have effect on human life without having all the information. I learned that some time ago.
Yesterday's detention of UN personnel in Iraq was repeated at a different location today, and one of the UN team described the situation on the telephone.
We are being held at the site. There are vehicles in the barricade blocking our exit. We are surrounded by security personnel. We are not being permitted to leave until we surrender our film, something which we are in fact not permitted to do.
Iraq's UN ambassador was summoned to explain the incident to the Security Council. He claimed it was a result of UN intrusion into private personnel files.
It's very improper, to say the least, and this is why we are not allowing, and will not allow any team, whether it's the UN team or any other team, to take these personal records because they are not covered by any resolution.
And on whether Iraq will unconditionally comply with all UN resolutions, it was maybe tomorrow again.
I told this President of the Council that I might be able to get a letter within 48 hours. And so right now I don't have any letter.
Would that be unconditional acceptance of...
I have to wait and see the letter itself.
A famous American baseball player used to describe situations like this as being deja vu all over again, like a replay of an old worn record. Further Security Council meetings on Iraq are inevitable, and an ultimatum to Baghdad is still quite possible. Gavin Esler, BBC News, New York.
Another row is looming between Britain and the European community over Dutch plans for political union. The Prime Minister, John Major, says the proposals as they stand are not acceptable. The text, published by the Dutch government, proposes that the European Parliament should be given the power of veto over legislation and that the Commission in Brussels should have a say in foreign policy and defence. It also calls for moves towards an eventual federal union, something Britain is expected to resist strongly.
The European Parliament will become a key decision-making body under the political union treaty now being put forward. MEPs would have the right to reject some EC laws and decisions, shifting power away from Westminster and national government. The Parliament has mainly an advisory role at the moment. Clearly, if this treaty is adopted, its remit would be increased significantly. The Dutch minister who's drawn up this paper says the Parliament must have a greater say, because more decisions will be taken in the future on a European level, and there must be a democratic element.
There should be democratic legitimacy. We have no doubt that the House of Commons and the Lords can assure that as far as British powers are concerned. But we have in the community decided with a single act to proceed to majority voting. That means basically that the British Parliament has lost its grip.
The Dutch paper is the culmination of 9 months of work, and time is running out to narrow the differences between all 12 EC member states. But because it still affirms a federal Europe as the final goal, Britain won't accept it as a basis for progress.
A senior British diplomatic source has told me there's now a clear danger of the political union talks collapsing, with no treaty signed at the Maastricht summit. Britain is not prepared to go along with any treaty that so vastly increases the European community's power.
EC foreign ministers will debate the new treaty on Monday, but the Germans are already saying that unless political union is agreed, they can't go ahead with monetary union. If they stick to that, both sets of talks could come to nothing. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, Brussels.
John Major couldn't have been more emphatic in Holland last week that he's opposed to the idea of the European Parliament becoming the community's powerhouse and will resist the word federal appearing in a treaty on political union. Now, with the Dutch forcing the pace, the Prime Minister has just 3 months. He started today with his French counterpart, Madame Cresson, to win allies to his cause ahead of the Maastricht summit in December.
I made it perfectly clear to the Dutch Prime Minister and others the areas where we saw very grave difficulty when we had a meeting last week. They can be in no doubt about those difficulties. I set them out clearly. They're still there. But even apart from that, once the text has been received, it is a basis for further negotiation. It's not a fait accompli.
Mr Major, conscious that arguments over European political and economic union can all too easily divide his party, has adopted a pragmatic conciliatory approach, in contrast to the line Mrs Thatcher took as Prime Minister and the case she put last night in Washington.
The nearer the EC approaches federalism, the further it departs from free trade and the more it becomes Fortress Europe.
We agreed when we became a member of the community that we would pool part of our sovereignty with the other members of the community. We've all done that. And so we have a say in the use of their sovereignty. Now, the essential thing about sovereignty is that it exists for the benefit of the citizen, not for politicians.
Significantly, Europe will not be debated as a single issue at next month's Conservative conference. So sensitive has it become within the party.
This is the issue which has forced 6 Conservative cabinet ministers to resign. It is an issue which splits the Conservative Party down the middle. They are simply in an unfit state to negotiate for Britain.
I'm sure the British public would welcome a dose of democracy being brought to bear to the whole process of decision-making in Europe. And the only way that we can do that in future is by giving the European Parliament more power.
Ahead of a general election, renewed arguments over Europe could seriously embarrass John Major. The Prime Minister will press for a revised treaty, which all member states can sign. But if the terms remain unacceptable, then the British government is prepared to use its veto to block further progress towards political union.
Another senior church leader has attacked the government's education policies. Cardinal Basil Hulme, the head of the Catholic Church in England and Wales, criticised plans to encourage more schools to opt out of local authority control. And he warned that increasing competition between schools could mean lower standards of education for the less well-off. His remarks follow similar criticism from the Archbishop of Canterbury last week.
Cardinal Hulme's criticisms go to the heart of government policy and its philosophy that market forces and competition between schools will raise standards. He told head teachers that increasing parental choice and tying funding to schools' popularity would create losers as well as winners, and less fortunate children would suffer.
There's a real risk, so it seems to me, that the choice will not lie with parents to choose schools, but with popular schools to be able to choose between children. And the impetus of the system will drive a wedge between the successful and the unsuccessful schools.
The Cardinal criticised government plans for exam league tables, the deplorable state of school buildings, and the narrow focus on education simply as preparation for employment. He said government policy of encouraging schools to opt out undermined education authorities and gave unfair financial advantage to schools which did leave council control.
Thus it would be wrong for some schools to be generously funded when others are insufficiently provided with basic facilities. Wrong, therefore, if the success of some schools means the failure of others.
Cardinal Hulme's criticisms come at a very sensitive time. All political parties are highlighting education as a general election issue, and ministers won't be pleased at this attack on the heart of their educational policies. It's all the more embarrassing for the government, coming as it does just a week after the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. George Carey, voiced similar criticisms. Today, the Education Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, said Cardinal Hulme was wrong in some of his conclusions and had failed to put sufficient emphasis on the advantages of parental choice.
The government has withdrawn a plan to end funding for some adult education classes, following strong protests from local authorities and educationalists. Under the proposal, students on non-vocational courses would have had to pay fees of up to £500 a term. Some courses, such as aerobics, could have disappeared altogether. The Labour Party has described the government's decision as a humiliating retreat.
Later in this news, the fragile ceasefire in Yugoslavia. More Federal Army reservists say they don't want to fight. And here, council leaders are told there'll be no reprieve for people who won't pay their poll tax. Now, the time is 6:17.
The headlines tonight. The group holding the British hostage, Jackie Mann, promised to release him at 6 o'clock London time. So far, there's been no sign. President Bush warned Saddam Hussein that he must cooperate over UN inspections of suspected nuclear plans in Iraq. The UN Security Council has just told Iraq it has to produce a response within the next 4 hours. John Major won't accept Dutch plans to give greater powers to the European Parliament. The Dutch want a more federal Europe. The government of Croatia has demanded that the Yugoslav army withdraw from its territory. It's the first time Croatia has made such a demand. Earlier today, the Croatian government accused the federal army of breaking the ceasefire and bombarding several Croatian towns. Serbia's main newspaper, Politica, today criticized the truce and accused the federal army of failing to protect the Serbian population.
Echoing over the valleys of central Serbia, army reservists, please report to the barracks. In the town of Kozjevic, no one was doing anything of the sort. 800 young men who were called up 3 days ago were today still refusing to get on army transport, never mind go and fight. We're ready to defend Serbia, they said, but we're not going off to war in Bosnia or Croatia. Anyway, no one's declared war yet. Their call-up papers describe them as volunteers, another reason for their anger. There's also suspicion among many families that reservists have taken the brunt of the action so far. I won't let him go. My son's not a volunteer. Who's going to defend us here? Family support was solid, as one regular officer discovered when he arrived to assess the situation. The officers responsible for gathering the reservists have no idea what to do. It is a criminal offence to avoid call-up. When one officer suggested that the law might be invoked, he got a very hostile response. Problems with reservists are intensifying as army casualties are announced. These men were injured in Tovarnik, on the eastern Croatian border. The army admitted today that fighting went on there through 30 hours of the ceasefire. They described their action as liberating the village, apparently destroying a good deal of it in the process. Even with the claims and propaganda put about by both sides, it's not difficult to understand the position of an army of unwilling, mostly Serbian reservists trying to liberate a village consisting entirely of Croatians. Kate Adey, BBC News, Belgrade.
Here, in the war of words between the political parties, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Norman Lamont, today claimed that under Labour, ordinary taxpayers would be £25 a week worse off. Mr. Lamont told party workers in London there was a massive black hole in Labour's fiscal plans. Filling it would cost the equivalent of 10p on income tax. Labour says there is no truth in the claim.
Regardless of the timing of the election, the phony war continued today, with the Chancellor predicting huge tax increases if Labour won. Though Labour's promised it will only increase spending as and when resources allow, Mr. Lamont calculates its pledges would cost £35 billion a year, only £10 billion of which would be covered by new taxes.
For Labour's numbers to add up, the basic rate of tax would have to shoot up by enough to find Labour's missing 25 billion. That 25 billion is the equivalent of 10p on the basic rate of tax.
Just 3 months ago, estimates of Labour tax increases were higher, 15%. So today's revised figure of just 10p has been greeted by the opposition with ridicule.
Well, I think it shows basically how incredible it is. They started off at 15p, now they've adjusted it to 10p, maybe they'll bring it down to 5p, maybe they'll get down to nothing. I don't know what's going on in the Conservative Party at the moment, but a lot of ministers are not doing the work they're supposed to be doing in the departments. They're busy trying to throw mud at the Labour Party.
At the launch of Labour's revamped housing policy today, its spokesmen were careful not to commit themselves to any extra spending. Brian Gould, the Shadow Environment Secretary, simply insisted he'd fight his corner in discussions with the Treasury team, a formula which could have come from the lips of any member of the current cabinet.
The government has refused an appeal by local authority leaders for more money. The Environment Secretary Michael Heseltine says he won't increase funding beyond what's already been announced. And he also said that there will be no amnesty for people who haven't paid their poll tax.
Council leaders had hoped to narrow the £2.2 billion gap between what they say they need to spend next year and what the government's providing in grant. But they were told that 7% extra was more than adequate.
They never say it's enough. They always want more, but central government has to take a responsible view and maintain the counter-inflationary programme, which is delivering these lower interest rates, which people find so attractive.
Council leaders were dismayed and warned of widespread cuts in services next year.
My own authority is probably going to have to cut £15 million next year. Many other authorities will be in the same position, and that's on top of large cuts this year.
Councils had also hoped to ease their poll tax collection problems by getting the government to introduce 100% rebates for the worst off, a concession already made for the new council tax. But people like Gerald Spears on income support will have to go on paying 20% of the charge in this and the final year of the poll tax. He says his budget is so tight he can't afford a bill even as low as £33.
It's got to the stage where I can't afford to pay anything at all, basically. My money's accounted for every week, and I would imagine most people in my situation it's the same.
Councils say up to a quarter of the non-payment cases now clogging magistrates' courts involve people on maximum rebates.
In one district council it's as small as £15, and to pursue a debt of £15 through the courts, in my opinion, doesn't make for either efficient, effective or economic local government.
The government's already conceded 100% rebates for its new council tax. Councils say if it did the same for the poll tax, it would allow them to concentrate on recovering bigger debts and reduce some of the big surcharges now appearing on bills, which have angered so many charge payers.
Lambeth Council in London is to hold an inquiry into the supervision of 15-year-old rapist Norbert McCooty, who committed 2 rapes while in their care. Yesterday at the Old Bailey, Norbert McCooty was ordered to be detained for 8 years and 7 months for the offences. The court heard that he had not been kept in secure accommodation after being remanded into the care of Lambeth Social Services after the first rape. Now it's been revealed that a place in a secure unit had been offered to the council.
When Norbert McCooty committed his first rape on February the 13th, the courts remanded him back to Lambeth Council Care, who put him in this home. The BBC has discovered that Lambeth did apply for a place in a secure unit on March the 11th from the London Children's Regional Planning Authority, which coordinates locked children's homes. Lambeth was told that there were secure places available for the boy in this locked unit and in one other. But 2 weeks later, Lambeth said they no longer required a secure place as they'd sent the boy to an open children's home. Juvenile crime has risen sharply. While there are over 5,000 places for convicted juveniles in Home Office young offender institutions, the number of secure places for the unconvicted in locked children's homes nationally has halved in the last 10 years, now standing at only 288. It is official policy to avoid locking up children, even offenders, wherever possible.
In many cases, the actual act of incarcerating young people can actually be counterproductive and make children and young people act out. They can become more violent in many cases.
But the police are calling for more juveniles on bail to be locked up.
Most of our crime, and as we all know, crime is tragically rising all the time, but the vast majority of it is actually committed by young people. And we really need it now to be providing resources to actually deal with those that are arrested and in time convicted for this type of offence.
Next year, the Criminal Justice Act will forbid courts from sending any 16 or 17-year-olds to adult prisons. Sending them back to their local councils will be put under even greater pressure. It costs them £1,500 a week to keep a child in a secure unit, twice the cost of an ordinary children's home.
The Home Secretary, Kenneth Baker, says parents bear much of the responsibility for teenage behaviour during the recent disturbances on Tyneside. Speaking at a police association conference in Torquay, Mr Baker said the question was not where were the police, but where are mum and dad?
The Home Secretary was among the senior officers at the sharp end of policing in Britain, the ranks in operational command of the streets, several of them who'd struggled for control recently against the rioters. Mr Baker paid tribute to them. They'd been attacked but hadn't buckled.
He told them of his concern about lack of parental responsibility during the street disturbances.
One of the most disturbing aspects of the recent incidents was the number of young children, juveniles, who were arrested for mindless violence or the destruction of property. The question when that occurs is not so much where are the police, but where are mum and dad?
The Home Secretary's comments struck a chord with the policemen from the areas hit by rioting.
It's a fair question. You know, parents, do you know where your children are? I think the vast majority do, but there's a minority who don't pay the care. And I think that's something that should be addressed.
With police forces reporting record levels of crime, the Superintendents Association suggested to Mr Baker a penalty point system for minor offenders, similar to that for motorists. If the points were totted up, jail should result, or at least a sentence which would genuinely deter. Mr Baker said the courts already had enough powers, but his response disappointed the police, who see persistent offenders still on the streets and who believe the criminal law is in a muddle.
And it's about half an hour now since the appointed time at which the kidnappers of Jackie Mann said they would release him. We're going back to our correspondent in Damascus, the Syrian capital, Michael Macmillan. Michael, any news?
Peter, I think patience is the byword now. Timescales in this sort of situation are rarely adhered to, so I wouldn't draw any conclusion from the fact that this release is half an hour late. The kidnappers have released a statement saying that they are going to release Mr. Mann. They've mentioned a specific time, they've mentioned a specific location, and certainly the Syrian view is that if the whole thing has got to this stage, it is highly unlikely to go wrong now.
Take us through the normal procedure briefly. How good are the phone links with Beirut from there, for a start?
Well, what happens is that the hostage is normally released into the hands of the Syrians who broker all of this. In this case, he'll also be released into the hands of the UN envoy Gian Domenico Pico. Now, if what we've seen in the past is anything to go by, Mr. Mann would be taken by road from Beirut to Damascus. That road journey takes 2 to 3 hours. And then he will appear at the Syrian Foreign Minister at a news conference. He'll then be taken to the British ambassador's residence, and then he'll probably be flown out of here by VC-10, either to RAF Lynham or, depending on his condition, because remember, Mr. Mann is 77 years old and he's been kidnapped now for 2.5 years. So depending on his condition, he might conceivably go to RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus.
Michael Macmillan, thank you very much. And that was the 6 o'clock news on Tuesday, the 24th of September. As you've just heard, there's still no word on the British hostage Jackie Mann. His wife, Sunny Mann, who last week said she'd lost all hope of seeing her husband soon, says, "This time, I think it really will happen." That's it so far. More news at 9. If there's any news in the meantime, we'll bring it to you.
Good evening. I've got some good news for the weather. That deep low pressure to the north of Scotland that brought the first of the autumn storms to Scotland is now moving away towards Scandinavia, taking the worst of its winds with it, but leaving us with a trailing front across southern parts of Britain that's been there all day today. And the radar's picked it up quite nicely, and you can see a line of rain from about 2 o'clock this afternoon, moving slowly towards Kent. And I think it's just about started raining in the far southeast of Kent now, and it's going to be a very slow-moving process. Elsewhere in the country, several showers, more especially in the north, to the north of our radar range. Now, as I said, that rain's going to move very slowly this evening and into tomorrow, and a line anywhere from the Isle of Wight to Suffolk, anywhere southeast of that, is likely to be wet throughout, just a little bit of rain and drizzle. Elsewhere, the blustery showers will tend to die back to the coast, and that will mean that temperatures are allowed to fall as the winds drop away, probably in the northeast, to 4 or 5, just a small chance of a touch of ground frost. Elsewhere, fairly mild, but the winds certainly lighter than they have been. Now, later on in the night, some heavier showers are likely to come in towards the southwest of Britain. Elsewhere, not much change. But if you have a look at the wind pattern, see how very light it is to start with. Southwesterly in here, but as I run the sequence, notice how they seem to start to circulate around the southern part of Ireland. By the time we get towards the end of tomorrow, just about the start of Thursday, there's a definite swirl around a low pressure just off Wales. And that's the cause of those heavier showers that start to come in during tomorrow morning. So let's have a look at tomorrow morning. Still the rather wet and misty weather around the southeast. Showers spreading out the Irish Sea towards the north of the country, but I think the showers in the extreme northwest likely to die out in the afternoon as others become rather heavier with the chance of thunder across Wales up into the northern Midlands, even the northern part of the country. And by that time, maybe Kent will just about start to see the sunshine if they're really lucky. Now, having a look at tomorrow's temperatures, very similar to today, but with a very much lighter wind. It's likely to feel warmer in many places. That's it till later.
If you care what you watch and what you read, get the Radio Times. Perfect professionals, Torvill and Dean on life after Bolero. But is there life after breakfast? Philosophical questions and stuff from Alexi Sale. On Screen 1, it's Griff minus Mel plus passion equals trouble.
And Queenie's back. So Radio Times has got the lowdown on the girls, the gossip on making out.
The Radio Times is packed with all-channel information and is so easy to use that even with the busiest of lifestyles, you're sure to catch the best in TV and radio. The Radio Times, it's essential reading.
This is BBC North. Look North is presented by Judith Stamper and Harry Gratian.
No quick fix for the Derbyshire Chief Constable's funding headache.
The return of the soup kitchens as the homeless prepare for the winter.
And the man they call Murphy the Mouth signs for Huddersfield.
Hello, good evening. There are fears tonight that the crisis facing Derbyshire's police force is set to deepen. In a special appeal to the County Council today, Chief Constable John Newing asked for money to pay for the recruitment of another 72 officers. He said that without urgent help, the force's problems would only get worse. A recent report from the Home Office Inspector of Constabulary said Derbyshire police are so under-resourced that they're on the point of disintegration. But Labour councillors said they're powerless to help. Mike McCarthy reports.
The Chief Constable went to Derbyshire County Council headquarters today with one purpose: to persuade the Labour-controlled authority to release money for his force and to do so quickly. The problems confronting the force include a serious shortage of staff, according to a recent report by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary. He said the inadequacies were so severe that the force was on the brink of disintegration. Today, Mr Newing reminded councillors that the inspector would be back.
Unless we get some injection of funds to the police budget before he returns, that he will actually not issue a certificate of efficiency. And that has very broad implications, not just for Derbyshire, but I think for the police service generally.
Conservatives called on the council to make money available to the police immediately and said that delay would aggravate the force's difficulties.
I'm actually concerned of the state that we are going to be in by the end of the financial year. And that if we don't provide some form of funding in this financial year, we could actually find that we will not have control of the Derbyshire Police Force and we will not have our certificate of efficiency granted. Now, all I'm saying is you must make the decision on that information that you've got available today. And on that decision, then you must understand what the consequences are.
I'm going to be the first to say that I too believe that the Derbyshire force is underfunded. I believe it's as a result of years and years of government cuts, not just on the police, and the cuts within the police can be mirrored in almost every police authority or constabulary within the land.
Labour councillors voted to ask the government to lift spending restrictions so that it could find more money for the police.
If the recommendation to write to the Secretary of State for the Department of the Environment actually brings more money, then I'll be very happy. But I suspect that it won't, and that the decision will then still confront us as to what do we do to deal with the issue of resources as far as policing in Derbyshire is concerned.
What they haven't decided to do today is to grant you immediate extra funding. You must be disappointed with that.
Well, yes, I'm disappointed. I think any chief officer would be disappointed. But the county council have got difficult political decisions to make about the resources they've got available.
So John Newing and his force remain at the eye of a political storm, as the argument over who is responsible for the crisis facing Derbyshire police force continues. Time is passing, and time, according to the Chief Constable, is not on his side. He knows that sooner rather than later, significant improvements will have to be made to prevent the Home Office from taking control of the Derbyshire force.
Well, joining me now to discuss today's developments are Councillor Bob Jones, who's Chairman of Derbyshire Police Authority, and Ivan Lawrence, Chairman of the Conservative Home Affairs Committee. He's in our Westminster studio. Bob Jones, first of all, if the Chief Constable comes along to you and says, look here, it's really urgent, I need these extra men, otherwise the police force is going to be no good at all, isn't there an onus on you to give him those men?
What John Newing actually put before us today was the recommendation that he should have more money when resources were available. And he understands, as I have made repeatedly clear, that it's going to be very difficult within the revenue budget of the county council overall, which was fixed to avoid capping, to find that extra money at this time. And repeatedly today the Conservatives were asked where that money should come from, and at no point did they say where it should come from. And that's the dilemma. Everybody agrees they should have more money. Nobody can tell me where it can come from without causing grave harm to other services that we provide.
Would it have been possible in former years to move more money from other areas where you were spending it to the police, instead of getting this accumulation?
But you see, we've always spent above either the grant-related level before it was changed to the current system, or the standard spending assessment as it is now, until this year.
But Mr. Jones, in Mr. Deer's report, it says here, you spent 1.8% per annum less than the average English non-metropolitan force, 14.4% accumulatively.
Yes, you have to remember that in general other counties have not faced the financial stringency that Derbyshire has faced. And in fact we have consistently protected the police as well as we could in the face of consistent central government attempts to cut back on the amount of funds available to us in general.
Right, I'll put that directly to Ivan Lawrence. The Derbyshire is a special case. It's faced funding cutbacks after funding cutbacks from the government.
Well, what's a special case? And I feel very sorry for the excellent police force in Derbyshire. It's not their fault that they're subject to the control of a loony left-wing council.
But aren't you putting a financial straitjacket on the council?
Of course there's a financial straitjacket on every council, but the same funding principles apply to Derbyshire as to every other shire county in the land. Why is it only in Derbyshire that this appalling comment upon the way in which the police force is being run by the Labour-controlled council is brought forward? It's because that they are wasting money which could be spent on the police force on such things as giving free football tickets to the unemployed, boosting with extravagant expenditure the advertising. They've got a nuclear-free zone. I'm a charge payer in Derbyshire. For years they have been behaving in an extraordinary way over their rates and the charges that they're imposing upon us through totally inadequate provision.
Isn't it equally farcical, though, that the government sets an SSA, a spending requirement, and says you must spend X on the police, and Derbyshire not only spends that over several years, it spends more. And why is that particular requirement, that particular sum of money that the government states, not enough to run a police force? You must recognise that.
Look, I repeat what I've just said before. Exactly the same principles apply to Derbyshire as every other shire county in the apportionment of government money. And yet Derbyshire is the only county that has produced this kind of report from the Chief Inspector of Police. And it is because the Derbyshire Police Authority does not give enough importance to the police force, and because the Derbyshire County Council, which is Labour-controlled, would rather squander the charge payers' money on all sorts of fripperies, and particularly on advertising. They've spent about £3 million a year on advertising.
Let's go back to Mr. Jones. Sorry, we're losing time here. Mr. Jones, in all of this political footballing, perhaps people watching might call it, the real losers must be ordinary Derbyshire folk who aren't getting law and order on their streets. What do you intend to do about it?
Could I make 2 points? I think for a Member of Parliament to trade in abuse. I've never been a trader in abuse or a sloganiser. I take my job as Chair of the Police Authority seriously. I think to throw about terms like loony left and squandering money, it's just playing games.
But before this interview ends, Mr Jones, can we just talk about Derbyshire people and what you're going to do about the situation on the streets there?
Despite all that's happening, Derbyshire is still a comparatively safe place to live. It has a comparatively low crime rate, although of course we are concerned about it. People are manufacturing a crisis where there's a problem. I shall address it with the Chief Constable John Newing, and we shall take sensible steps to actually solve the budget problem we have, but not in the manner we've just had from Westminster.
Mr Lawrence, finally from you, isn't it really, coming back to the Derbyshire people, the ones who are suffering, isn't it really up to the Home Secretary to do something about it? Ultimately, it's his responsibility. Whatever he feels about Derbyshire County Council, shouldn't he take over the police force or give them more money?
Well, local government at present organises and controls the operation of the police force, not the Home Secretary. And as long as that remains, then it's up to Derbyshire County Council to do the job properly.
Even if burglaries go up from 65% to 100%?
The Home Secretary can step in and will step in if this is only an interim report, if the Derbyshire Police Authority doesn't get its act together between now and the end of the year. But it's perfectly untrue for Mr Jones to say that the policing in Derbyshire is as good, as effective as the policing elsewhere. A lot of Derbyshire isn't policed at all, and that's no fault, as I say, of the excellent police force, but it's the fault of the police authority. And the increase in crime in Derbyshire has, I think, been half the rate of increase in the rest of the country.
Very briefly,
nobody can claim that the police force is being given a fair chance in Derbyshire.
Did I hear you say the Home Secretary would step in if he felt it was necessary?
The Home Secretary has powers to step in if the Derbyshire Police Authority doesn't get its house in order by the end of the year.
Gentlemen, I have to stop you there. Thank you very much indeed.
Some news just in, actually, from Reuters. We've heard that Jackie Mann has been released in the Lebanon. We hope to have more details about that later in the programme. The Prison Officers Association has warned that there could be serious disturbances at Full Sutton Jail in York unless known troublemakers are taken out of the mainstream prison population. Inmates who are believed to have been behind the recent prison riots, including the disturbances at Strangeways in Manchester, have been transferred to Full Sutton. The POA claims those prisoners are now stirring up more trouble. Jeremy Hibbard reports.
The Strangeways riot last year sparked off a series of disturbances in jails all over the country. Some were copycat riots, but according to the Prison Officers Association, others are the work of a hard core of troublemakers committed to disrupting the system in whichever prison they're moved to. The POA says there are 7 maximum security jails known as dispersal prisons where the troublemakers are housed. At the moment, 2 in particular, Frankland in Durham and Full Sutton in York, have more than their fair share.
They have an ability to guide and to pull into unlawful activities within prison many people. I mean, it's easy to understand how we got leaders in these serious disturbances and how we identify those leaders and how those leaders came to be in place. They are very manipulative characters indeed, and they are the kind of people who intimidate and both staff and inmates and cause the kind of disruption that we're seeing at Full Sutton and at Frankland and within the dispersal system as a whole.
At Full Sutton, that disruption has resulted in many staff going off sick with stress-related illnesses. Prison officers say they haven't the manpower to staff the new F-wing, which is still waiting to be opened.
We feel that we've lost, to a certain extent, control of the prison. Officers are being assaulted. They're having buckets of excreta thrown over them. We've had one taken hostage quite recently. Prison officers, although we accept, can be assaulted in the course of their duties. This is not what they're employed for.
An officer taken hostage in July is the most serious incident at the jail to date. There have been others, but the prison governors don't believe they're losing control.
The dispersal system is a difficult system to work in and a very difficult system to manage. I think, as I've said earlier, I think we're doing quite well at the moment. We've had a period of difficulty. I firmly believe that we're going now into a period where we'll be more stable.
But the POA says it will continue to promote its idea of a single jail where unruly prisoners can be kept away from the mainstream prison population.
More news now, and police in South Yorkshire are warning that copper cyanide, which was stolen overnight, is deadly and will kill if swallowed or inhaled. 4 kilos of the poison was stolen in a burglary at a small industrial company at Thurnscoe near Barnsley.
Police say Teresa Munns, the Bradford teenager who was seriously assaulted at the weekend, has regained consciousness, but has so far been unable to tell them what happened. She's now been moved out of intensive care.
A public inquiry has opened into plans for a controversial scheme to transform a 200-year-old mill in a North Derbyshire beauty spot into a hotel and timeshare holiday accommodation. The scheme's already been rejected by the Peak Park Planning Board, but the developers have launched an appeal.
The Duke Mart Property Company had hoped to transform the Lytton Mill near Tideswell into a holiday complex, but their plans were rejected in July last year. The mill has been largely idle for 20 years, although houses formerly used by mill apprentices are still occupied. Today in Bakewell, a government inspector, Victor Amoun, opened a public inquiry into the proposed development after the Duke Mart Company launched an appeal. Local residents have collected a 14,000 signature petition, and opposition to the plan remains fierce.
This is a very pleasant, very quiet, very peaceful, very natural limestone dale with the River Wye running through it. A very narrow road leads down to it. It is in fact a cul-de-sac, you can't get out of the other end, and a development of this nature we believe would swamp the local community, transform the local community into something which the local people don't want.
This afternoon, Mr. Amoun went to inspect the site. Over the next 5 days, he'll hear submissions from dozens of interested parties before making his recommendations to the Environment Secretary, Michael Heseltine.
Well, first it was Dougie Lawton, then Ellery Hanlon. Now Alex Murphy has become the 3rd big rugby league name this year to cross from the wrong to the right side of the Pennines. Well, in about an hour and a half or so, Alex will put pen to paper and sign a 3-year contract as coach with Huddersfield. In a moment, I'll be talking to him about his decision to move east. But first, here's a little taste of what's in store for Huddersfield's fans and players.
Come on, referee, not on personal terms. Run with it, move up! Move up!
You want to stay in the swimming squad, you're going to have to start booking sections. And I mean it, honestly, because it's not going right, lad.
Alex Murphy, one of rugby league's biggest names, made his reputation as player and coach on the other side of the Pennines.
You put in was absolutely superb.
But now, after spells with Leigh, Wigan, Warrington, Salford and St Helens, Murphy's agreed to put his toe in Yorkshire waters at Huddersfield.
Am I going to play at Wembley?
He's used to winning, and that's what he's promised for Huddersfield, although he's warning the Fartown fans not to expect any overnight success. But he says there will be a vast improvement. The last time Huddersfield won at Wembley was back in 1953. In front of 90,000 fans, they beat St Helens by 15 points to 10. But since then, the glory days have been few and far between, so the Huddersfield players can expect some stern talking from the new boss.
Is that what some of you fellas call playing? Now bloody get out there for 40 minutes and I want to see a vast improvement. And I mean a vast improvement.
Murphy's job now is to mould the potential Huddersfield have shown this season into a consistent winning formula. Then perhaps one of rugby league's sleeping giants will finally spark back into life.
Well, a short time ago I spoke to Alex Murphy, always a controversial figure of course, but one of the great names of rugby league. Why had he chosen 3rd Division Huddersfield then?
Well, I've thought long and hard. I've had about 3 or 4 offers since I was removed from Leigh. And they seem a club to me. It was between them and Keighley. And they seem a club who want to go forward. They're a club with a great tradition. And really, I want to try and give them a little bit of pride back if possible.
You've got an awful lot to do there. All due respect to the people who are working very hard at Huddersfield, I know, but they are in the 3rd Division. You're used to 1st Division football to a certain extent, and that's where you made your reputation. How do you feel about that?
Well, we'll just have to get them out to the 3rd Division quickly. It all depends on the people who want to work at Huddersfield. If they want to stay in the 3rd Division forever, that's their business, but I don't, and we will be moving forward very quickly. I think the Board of Directors want to go forward. We've got a good marketing man in David Parker, so I can't see any reason why we shouldn't go forward.
What about money? You need money. You do need to strengthen your team, obviously. Everyone does.
Yes, and that 3rd Division, like I say, Harry, it's one of them divisions where everybody wants to get out of it. So a lot of clubs are spending money. I think if the board of directors say we've not got a fortune to spend, I'll understand, but they will make some money available.
But I go back to Fartown, and when I see it, it's you want to cry, because the ground was once one of the great grounds of rugby league football. Is there anything that can be done to bring that back, or is reality just setting in now? It will never be what it was.
I don't think you should ever say nothing can be done. I think Huddersfield was probably one of the great sides of the 50s, the last side to win 5 trophies, and it really is a tragedy for a club like that to happen what has happened to them. But, you know, strange things can happen in life. I think they could be on the way up. I think the town is going to get behind them. I think the board of directors will get behind them. And I think within 12 months you'll see a different Huddersfield and a little bit more pride.
3-year contract. I understand it's also linked with all kinds of bonuses if you produce the goods. Does that worry you?
Not at all. I've always been under pressure all my life. I don't think it's going to change now. The nice thing I've got here is I've got directors who are going to let me be in charge of rugby. They're not going to be telling me, bring me and then say to me, hey, listen, I know where there's a good player.
OK, a nice start for you. Wakefield Trinity and Doncaster. 2 wins would be nice, wouldn't it?
It certainly would.
Good luck, Alex.
Thank you.
Well, 77 years ago, the city of Leeds responded to Lord Kitchener's famous slogan, "Your country needs you," as the First World War took its toll on the youth of Britain. The Leeds pals were just that, friends who wanted to go to war for the excitement and the glory. The reality was different. The pals were trained in the art of war in a few short months at Colsterdale in North Yorkshire. Now, on the anniversary of their call-up, only one Leeds pal survives, Arthur Dolby. Recently, the Lord Mayor of Leeds held a special reception in honour of Arthur and the pals who'll never die.
What we're really celebrating, if celebrating is the right word, is a memory of people who gave their all for their country, who had that which we all call Yorkshire grit and determination, who were determined that, and they volunteered, that their country meant something special to them, and that they were, in the ultimate, prepared to lay down their lives for it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll join with me, the toast is the Leeds Pals.
The Leeds Pals were the businessmen of the city of Leeds, or the sons of businessmen. When Kitchener published his call to arms in the press throughout Britain in 1914, the working classes responded very quickly. But Lord Derby of Liverpool raised a battalion called the Liverpool Pals, and the idea was that they should, they're all men from the same class and the same social background, and they should all serve together. And a lot of cities raised battalions from the city businessmen, and the Leeds Pals were the businessmen of Leeds. They actually started recruiting in this hall on the 3rd, 4th and 5th of September 1914, which is 77 years ago today. Within 3 days they'd got 1,000 men and the battalion was virtually complete.
In this room, they sent me to a table after the doctor had done with me. Yeah. They sent me to a table. It says, take particulars, chance you try to escape. And they looked at me and I was 21 then, and they looked at me and they said, sallow complexion, large nose, mole on the right cheek. Before they'd done with me, I felt like Frankenstein.
Arthur Dolby was among the last casualties. He was actually gassed in October 1918 by German artillery shells and lost his eyesight for about 3 weeks, which was quite a frightening business for a man in his early 20s. There are 2 memorials to the Pals. There was a memorial cairn up at Colsterdale on the Yorkshire Dales where the Pals first trained. That was built and designed and paid for by the Leeds Pals.
I'm very proud to have been a Leeds Pal. I never wished to meet better men than I met up here in my life, because they were really truly true friends, and I went through four years of war with them, and I never had a wrong word with any one of them.
Why did you join up? Dare I say, was it almost the chance of having a holiday?
Yes, you dare say that, because I never had a holiday from leaving school to being 21 till I came up here. My father was one of the old type fathers, you know. He only believed in two things, bed and work.
What about the Somme? 75th anniversary this year. All your friends, or at least many of your friends, were wounded or killed there.
There were 500, between 500 and 600 casualties, but it was all along the line, the Bradford pals, and all along the line there were big losses. I was a lucky chap at July 1st because I was on leave and I'd just come back. And the following morning I went up helping to bring out the dead and the wounded and that. I wasn't in July 1st.
What did you think, Arthur, then, when you were bringing your friends back who were dead? I mean, when you were literally carrying them back?
Well, I can't tell you, I can't really explain my thoughts. Very downhearted, very... Something I'll never forget as long as I live.
From the Somme?
Yes.
You went, I think, to Arras, where you were wounded. Can you tell us about that?
I was gassed. I wasn't wounded, I was gassed. And I must have had something, there must have been something in the gas that affected the brain as well, because I opened my eyes and I couldn't see anything at all. Everything was totally black. And they were in cattle trucks, and the stretchers were put on shelves. I didn't know I was in a cattle truck, but I put my hand out at the side and it was wood. And then I realised I was on wheels. And I thought, I'm being buried and I aren't dead. And then I put my hand out at the other side and there wasn't anything, so it was a one-sided coffin. They shall grow not old, as we are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. They gave up all their tomorrows so that we might have our todays.
Mr. Arthur Dalby, the last of the Leeds pals. That's it from us, but don't forget that there's a special news bulletin after this programme to tell you more about the release of hostage Jackie Mann. Good evening from both of us.
Now on BBC One, before the next programme, we return to the newsroom and Peter Sissons.
It's been confirmed that the British hostage Jackie Mann has been released, ending 865 days of captivity in Beirut. He was freed at a Beirut hotel just over 20 minutes ago, and it's now expected he'll be taken to the Syrian capital, Damascus. Mr. Mann, a 77-year-old former World War II pilot, was the oldest of the 10 Western hostages held in the Lebanon. His wife, Sunny, who's been waiting for news in Cyprus, is expected to fly to Damascus to be reunited with her husband later tonight. Our Middle East correspondent, Michael Macmillan, is in Damascus. Michael, that's the bones of it. What other details do you have?
Well, basically, this release has taken place in the same sort of form as other releases over the past 18 months. Journalists were asked to appear at the Beau Rivage Hotel in Beirut, but while they were there, Mr. Mann was handed over to the Syrians and the UN envoy Jan Domenico Pico elsewhere. So Mr. Mann has not been seen yet. What will happen now is that he will be taken under Syrian escort to Damascus. That road journey will take 2 or 3 hours. He will then appear at the Syrian Foreign Ministry where there will be a news conference. After that, Mr. Mann will then go to the British ambassador's residence here in Damascus, and then he will be taken by RAF VC-10 either to RAF Lynham or possibly to RAF Akrotiri. It will depend on what sort of condition he's in. As you said, he's 77 years old. He's been held for 2.5 years, and he still suffers from injuries that he received when he crashed during the war. There is speculation tonight, Peter, finally, that an American hostage could be released. If it is to be, it could be Joseph Sisipia, who is held by the Revolutionary Justice Organization, the same organization that has been holding Mr. Mann.
Michael Macmillan, thank you very much. The next main news is at 9, but if there are more details emerging before then, we'll be back with more.
In half an hour, the speculation continues amongst the EastEnders of Albert Square. First on one, we join Paul Daniels and the couples taking part in the game show on which every second counts.